He didn't expect a thank you, but he also didn't expect to be forgotten. Miguel had always known his family was good at remembering birthdays, anniversaries, and who brought what to the potluck, but somehow not the man who ran into a burning building to save their most sacred space. The old chapel on Prescott Hill had caught fire just weeks before Isabella's wedding. The same chapel their family had prayed in for generations, the one she had dreamed of walking down since she was 12. It was Miguel who answered the call. No questions, no hesitation, just the sound of the alarm, the scent of smoke, and the memory of his cousin's eyes lighting up when she first saw the place. That night, he had been off duty. He was driving home from a late shift, hands still smelling of ash and metal, when the dispatcher's voice crackled through the radio about a fire breaking out in a historic chapel. He knew instantly. His chest tightened. He turned the car around. By the time he arrived, flames were already licking the wooden arches. Most of the team hadn't even been dispatched yet. He went in first, guided only by instinct, by the beat of his heart, and the ghost of old hymns echoing in the walls. Inside, it felt like time folded. His boots sunk into wet, burning carpet, his eyes stung with smoke. But he kept going, found the fuse box, cut the spread, made way for the team. Hours passed. The fire didn't take the chapel. It didn't take Isabella's wedding. But it did take something else, the chance for Miguel to be seen as more than a man they tolerated. After the fire, the story circulated. A small electrical, short minor damage, the paper said. The church remained standing, though the walls still bore the scars. But Miguel's name was never in the paper. No call from the family, no acknowledgement from Isabella. At the next Sunday dinner, someone mentioned how lucky they were that the fire didn't reach the altar. Miguel just nodded, a quiet knot growing in his chest. They all knew he had been there. They just chose to look past it. Maybe because looking at him reminded them of things they didn't want to face, of who he loved, of who he was. He had grown used to being the side note in their stories, the cousin who never brought a girlfriend, the one who moved to the city and lived in a one-bedroom with another man they never named. When he came out, there were no fights, just silence. A kind of polite erasure, as if saying nothing could soften the shape of the truth. And Miguel had learned to live with that. Until the day came when he walked back into the chapel, no longer as a firefighter, not as a cousin, not even as a guest of honor, just as someone who had kept the roof from collapsing. In his own quiet way, Miguel believed that love, real love, wasn't loud. It was running into flames for people who would never say thank you. It was showing up even when you knew your name wouldn't make the speech. It was holding a line of duty and dignity, knowing that sometimes family doesn't see you until someone else forces them to look. And in that moment, sitting alone at the back pew, Miguel didn't ask for recognition, but he deserved it. If Miguel's story touched your heart, help others hear it too. Like this video, share it with someone who needs to be reminded of their worth, and subscribe to Heart Stories, where real voices rise through the silence. The chapel looked nearly perfect on the day of Isabella's wedding. Fresh paint masked the scorch marks. White flowers bloomed across every arch. The stained glass windows, some still speckled with soot at the edges, sparkled in the morning light. It was a beautiful illusion, like nothing had ever burned, like no one had ever fought to keep it standing. Miguel arrived early, as he always did. He'd spent years learning to show up on time, to be dependable, to hold space in places that didn't offer it freely. He wore his only suit, navy, crisp, the same one he'd worn to his academy graduation. His partner Ben wasn't with him. He hadn't been invited. The wedding RSVP had arrived weeks earlier, addressed only to Miguel Ramirez. No +1, no option, no surprise. Inside the chapel, family clustered in familiar warmth. Laughter rippled from group to group, rising like incense. Aunts fixed their makeup in compact mirrors. Uncles adjusted each other's ties. His younger cousins posed for selfies under the altar. Miguel found his name on a printed seating chart by the entrance, small font near the bottom. Table 12, back row. He made his way to the table tucked in the far corner of the reception hall, behind a pillar and a potted fern. A single candle flickered in the center. The place cards around him were names he didn't recognize, +1s of extended family and a cousin's college roommate. He smiled, though no one met his eyes. It was the kind of table people passed on the way to somewhere better. From that distance, Miguel watched the celebration unfold like a silent film. Isabella glided down the aisle, radiant in lace and tulle. Her father, Miguel's uncle, walked proudly beside her. The same uncle who once said over dinner, "We love Miguel, but he's just different." You know, the same uncle who hadn't spoken to him since. When the ceremony ended, the crowd poured into the courtyard for photos. Miguel stood near the edge waiting to be called. He wasn't. One group photo, then another. Immediate family, extended family, childhood friends, the pastor, even the florist. When he finally stepped forward, a cousin turned and said with a gentle hand on his shoulder, "Oh, the photographer's almost done. Maybe grab one with you later." He stepped back, not angry, just hollow. He'd walked into burning beams for these people, not for the recognition, but because it was right. And yet now, in the warmth of a day meant to celebrate love and belonging, Miguel stood inches from it and felt none. As Isabella tossed her bouquet, Miguel turned away, pretending to check his phone. It wasn't bitterness that ached in his chest. It was clarity. This wasn't just about a photo. It was about being invisible in a room full of people who owed him more than a smile. It was about how love, when conditional, becomes cruelty wrapped in politeness. And still he stayed. Because even when his place was a shadowed seat in the corner, Miguel showed up. That was who he was. That was the man they had overlooked. The reception moved with an effortless joy that made Miguel feel like a stranger at his own bloodline's gathering. Glasses clinked. Music swelled. The air buzzed with stories from childhood, inside jokes, warm congratulations passed around like shared wine. But none of them reached his table. He sat quietly, his fork untouched, watching the golden hours stretch across the room. The backdrop for the bride and groom's photos was the same stained glass window he had shielded with his jacket, while smoke rolled across the rafters. No one knew that. No one asked. It was as if his presence was tolerated, but his story was off limits, too inconvenient to fit the narrative of a perfect day. There was a moment during dinner when Isabella passed close by. Their eyes met for a second. He opened his mouth, maybe to say how happy he was for her, or maybe to ask if she remembered who made this day possible. But someone grabbed her hand and whisked her away for another picture. Miguel lowered his gaze, not out of shame, but out of something heavier, recognition. They didn't see him, not really. And worse, they didn't want to. When the speeches began, Miguel turned slightly in his chair to face the stage. The best man followed, spinning jokes and old stories, the crowd laughing with their whole bodies. And finally, Isabella, glowing, graceful voice trembling with emotion. She thanked her parents for their sacrifices, her friends for their loyalty, and her husband for his unwavering love. And then it was done. No mention of Miguel, not even a glance. He clapped softly with the others, his hands numb. It wasn't the absence of praise that hurt, it was the deliberate silence. They had rebuilt their fairy tale on ashes and pretended the fire had never happened. Pretended he had never happened. A child, Isabella's niece, wandered to his table, chasing a napkin in the breeze. She stopped, looked at him curiously, then asked, "Are you the man who saved the church?" Her voice was clear, innocent. Miguel smiled gently and nodded. Before he could say anything more, the girl's mother rushed over, scooped her up, and apologized with forced cheer. "Sorry about that, Miguel. She's a little explorer." But the look she gave her daughter said something else. "We don't bring that up here." Miguel leaned back in his chair, eyes following the patterns in the chandelier. A strange ache settled behind his ribs. He had spent years believing that silence was a form of peace, that being quiet made things easier for everyone. But now he saw it differently. Silence was how people erased you. And in that moment, surrounded by laughter that didn't include him and memories that skipped his name, Miguel wondered, not for the first time, if love without acknowledgement was really love at all. The priest was not expected to speak again. He had already performed the ceremony, offered a prayer before the meal, and quietly blended into the background like every officiant did once their part was done. But as the DJ faded out a song and the clatter of silverware quieted, the priest stepped forward to the microphone, unannounced, unhurried. At first, no one noticed. Conversations continued in waves. The photographer adjusted lights. The staff brought out the cake. Miguel didn't look up either. He was tracing the edge of his glass, with one finger counting how many songs had passed since the last time anyone had said his name. Then the microphone cracked to life. "There's something I need to say," the priest began, voice even clear. "Before we move forward with tonight's celebration, I must speak about something I was not asked to include. But I believe silence in some case becomes complicity." That word complicity hung in the air like a wire pulled tight. Tables quieted, heads turned. This house of worship, he continued gesturing to the chapel walls, would not be standing here today if not for a man in this room. Weeks ago, a fire broke out. Most of you may not know how close we came to losing everything, but I know because I was there the next morning, walking through smoke with ash on the pews, wondering how the flames had been stopped before they reached the altar. Miguel slowly lifted his eyes. It was a firefighter, off-duty, unnamed in the reports, uninvited in the retellings, but not invisible to God. The room shifted. Some faces registered confusion. Others began whispering. One woman clutched her pearls. The priest scanned the guests, then spoke with a quiet power that didn't need volume. His name is Miguel Ramirez. He didn't ask for recognition. He didn't wait for applause. He ran into fire because he believed this place, this family was worth saving. And tonight he sits among you, unacknowledged, almost forgotten, but not by me. Silence. Then the priest took a breath that trembled with something deeper than admiration. This building was once touched by fire. It bears the scars if you look closely enough. And so does Miguel. But he did not let it take him, just as he would not let it take this chapel. What kind of love survives rejection? The kind that runs toward danger. The kind that stays seated in the shadows and claps for others anyway. The kind that reflects the divine. The priest stepped back. Miguel sat motionless. At first no one moved. Then one person clapped. Then another. And then slowly a wave of applause swelled from the center of the room and rolled outward like a tide no one had the power to stop. Dozens of people turned their heads toward the back corner where Miguel sat. And for the first time that day, he was truly seen. Not as the gay cousin, not as the one who lived in the city, but as the man who had carried something burning and refused to let it consume him. He didn't stand, he didn't bow, he just sat there still. Tears gathering in the corners of his eyes, hands resting quietly in his lap. Somewhere in that room, hearts shifted. Not all of them, but enough. After the applause faded, something subtle but irreversible began to change. People who had spent the evening avoiding Miguel's table now offered half smiles, sheepish nods, or the safe shelter of small talk. Some came with rehearsed lines of gratitude. Others fumbled for words, unsure of how to bridge the years of silence they'd once believed was easier than acceptance. Miguel didn't hold it against them. He wasn't looking for apologies, not anymore. He rose to stretch his legs and walked toward the side garden, needing air. The chapel glowed behind him like a memory trying to forgive itself. He didn't expect anyone to follow, but then he heard soft footsteps. It was Isabella's son Luca, older than 8, clutching a small disposable camera in his hand. He didn't say much, just looked up and said, "Mom said you're a real firefighter." Miguel smiled. "I am." "Cool," the boy said. "Can I take your picture? I want to keep it." It wasn't a professional portrait. There were no posed smiles, no curated backdrop. Just a child's shaky hand, a flash that barely lit the dusk, in a moment captured in the kind of innocence that doesn't ask who you love before it sees who you are. Later that night, after the cake was cut and the dance floor dimmed, Isabella finally approached. Her makeup was slightly smudged, and her eyes shimmered with something heavier than the weight of the day. "I should have said something," she whispered. "I let other people's comfort matter more than your place here." Miguel didn't reply right away. He looked past her toward the stained glass window, now catching moonlight. "You don't have to fix the past," he said quietly. "Just stop pretending it didn't burn." She nodded, and for the first time all evening, she hugged him. The next morning, Miguel packed his things and drove back to the city. The suit went back in its bag. The chapel returned to its usual silence. But on his dashboard, tucked behind a receipt and an old ID badge, was the photograph Luca had given him before he left. The colors were uneven. The angle was off. But there he was, smiling, slightly caught off guard, the scorched chapel standing behind him like a survivor. It wasn't a family photo, but it was the only picture that felt true. Sometimes the people who raise you forget how to recognize your worth. Sometimes they try to crop you out of their history because it's easier than confronting their own narrow frame. But there will always be someone, maybe a stranger, maybe a priest, maybe a child, who sees you fully and reminds you you don't need a spotlight to have value. Just the courage to hold your place in the fire and come out whole. Have you ever been left out of a moment that should have included you? How did you find your way back to your own worth? If Miguel's journey spoke to something inside you like this video, share it with someone who needs to be reminded of their strength, and subscribe to Heart Stories. Because every story deserves its moment, especially the ones no one wanted to tell.